Blacksmith of the Apocalypse. By Arcuser. Chapter 1081 Fairy Maids? Seth wouldn't tell someone trustworthy like that he couldn't join Mina's march. But there were other things they would have to take into account. What about the tournament? If you join Mina's Mar, you won't be able to compete. Nobody who was part of Mina's Mar was supposed to take part in the tournament. Especially not someone with a legendary item made by him. It was already bad enough that he showed off the helmet during the preliminaries. I don't really care about the tournament. My quest was finished after the preliminaries, the buff man said without a waver in his voice. It seemed like he really held no interest in the request for a legendary item. Just so you know, even the people in Mina's Mar have to earn legendary items. I won't throw a full equipment set at you, he made it clear. Although he did that for Ortega, that was only because he was very interested in how the Slaughterer's set would come out when made with bones of Seth. Ortega's need for an armor set was more of an excuse to make the armor, than caring for Ortega. I didn't think so either, Bart said in a hurry to clear the misunderstanding. I'm just messing with you. Not about the earning part, but I didn't believe you thought that way, Seth calmed him down. I would be happy for you and your people to join Mina's march. Mary and the others will discuss the details with you. Now, sit back on your chair, and let's have a real conversation. He asked him to sit back since it was indeed a little awkward if he kept kneeling before him. How exactly they would proceed with these survivors of Y City was a topic for later. What Seth was more interested in was the current situation around Y City. He had only been there for a short time and left most of the fighting to the golems, but this short time was enough to make him curious about the new kinds of creatures that appeared. Especially the geese was intriguing to him. Although he had not yet managed to circumvent the restrictions of these powers in a satisfying way, there had been some successes, making him just more interested to see what other powers might be out there. Do you know anything about the new creatures that appeared after the awakening of the slumbering realm? The blacksmith asked. Although the abandoned ruins were in the southern part of Epsilon closer to the coast and not exactly close to Y City, Bart and his people had been there all this time, maybe they had more experience with them. Seth had gotten a glimpse at the unique power of geese, but he had little to no information about the creatures themselves. For example, Strike for Bone and Dig Dimblood both mentioned things like courts, which seemed to be alliances of these creatures. Do you mean those from the fog? Or those from the Fade? Bart asked, motivated to help. Those from the fog were probably the glow people Seth despised, but... the Fade? What are they? The blacksmith asked at the weird way to call them. Seth hoped they weren't talking past each other on the matter. That's what some of them call themselves, at least the ones that can be spoken to. Apparently, it's because they had faded from this world, or something like that. I also met one or two that called themselves Veiled Ones, as they are not fully part of our world, or something like that, Bart said with a shrug. Maybe he was a good leader with the heart in the right place, but he definitely didn't have a talent for information gathering. The way he talked about it sounded more like yarn, than reliable info. Still. Since Bart was the only source, the blacksmith intended to use it. That sounds like you interacted with them a bunch of times. Can you tell me more about what kinds there are in their society? Some who I met talked of courts, like what a king would have. He asked for the piece he did hear about. Bart nodded ponderingly. He took a moment to sort his thoughts before he answered. There are those who live in groups, they call courts, yes. Many of the Fade belong to this group, but at least just as many are solitary, and some of the really feisty ones are more like monster packs. At least the courts can be talked to, even the more hostile ones. He finally gave his opinion on the matter based on his experience. The Veiled on the other hand are almost completely solitary, either appearing whenever they like or living in secluded places. For example, one of our scouts met an old woman, living in a strange hut, in a thick small forest that had not existed a year ago. The woman spoke to him when he just got inside of the hut and asked him to share some of his rations. He said that the encounter was extremely disconcerting, but the woman did not make any hostile moves, so he shared some of his rations and was able to leave just like that. But he swears that he slipped through death's claws that day. Had he somehow offended her, who knows what she would have done to him. The next time he came by the same opening in the ruins, it was just an empty field of debris. No forest, no hut. Bart shared some yarn, that sounded like a fairy tale. Except for the fact that he didn't gain anything from the encounter. Or maybe he just didn't share if he gained something. So some of them have the ability to appear and vanish however they like. Some do, but it seems there are conditions on the where. They aren't like assassins that suddenly appear behind you, and it seems like they can't appear in settlements, homes, or protected areas. At least so far, none of them suddenly appeared in the middle of your complexes, but maybe that's just courtesy? I wouldn't doubt it for some of them, the leader from South Epsilon said with a shrug. It seemed like Bart and his people had no big problems with the fate in general, but he mentioned the feisty ones, so the blacksmith asked him to elaborate on that. Ah, well, you were in Y City yourself, right? You saw some of the creatures that appeared. Though many can't compare to high-level beasts from dungeons or the Pathworks, there are those that are very tricky and others that are extremely strong. Scouts vanish regularly, with only a few coming back telling stories of beautiful women appearing at night, charming them, and drinking the blood of their companions. A fade we know said they are called Baobhan, a terrifying type of vampire. Other examples the Chosen of Crius mentioned were swarms of evil spirits that moved as one entity with a kind of hive mind, lone wolves that were almost undetectable and would hunt people for miles, literally stalk them, even wait outside the city until they left again. And, of course, he also mentioned the goblin-like creature with red caps, Mike had also mentioned before. If they were not in the system age, where magic and skills were available to most, these stories would have been more than just concerning. At least they were able to fight back, if necessary. The mood had dipped a little, talking about some of the terrible fates that happened to his subordinates, but in the middle of the ensuing silence, Bart sighed. At least they aren't all bad or dangerous, unlike 99% of what comes from the portals, he mentioned, rousing Seth's curiosity. The blacksmith could only remember 2-3 instances where the newcomers were good. He himself had met Strike Forbone, who seemed like an okay dude. Mike had met a kind of white Vezent that kind of helped their group. But those two were more neutral than good. The last one was rather recent, it was the dwarfs who called themselves the Ston Eborn, that appeared in the northeastern mountains and helped a group of cultivators when they were in danger. Good ones. Yeah, they are actually a big help now that I think of it. Small creatures of various humanoid shapes. They will ask for protection and food, in exchange, they help in the house using some nifty magic. Seth was getting ideas, but he already had his golems. Was there room for fairy maids? Chapter 1082 First Round. Finally, what all of you have been waiting for. The first round of the Pythian Games Martial Tournament. 42 high-level players have slaughtered their way through the preliminaries to arrive at this point. They have come from all around the Pathworks, all of them aiming for the top, the glory, and the final prize of a legendary item. Welcome back, everyone. UMI Calldrops greeted the crowd, winking into one of the golem's eyes. Heavy rain was drumming on the roof above the stands, but the rain magically evaded the prominent announcer, floating in the air. It wasn't the best weather for an event. The weather couldn't diminish the amount of poltern the audience was engaging in, before anyone even entered the oval. Raindrops splashed on the fresh stage, mirroring the lights of the crowd. Once again, the center of the stadium had changed overnight. The preliminaries had left irreparable scars on the arena, so much so, that they had to completely exchange it. The new square was covered in expensive impact marble, ready for the abuse of the intense fights of the tournament. It was also shielded by a freshly strengthened barrier to ensure the safety of the audience. Please greet our participants, she called out, and 41 people lined up on the stage, being drenched by the heavy rain. Of course, they could have blocked the rain, with the fancy new barrier, but Minasmar made the executive decision, that battling in the heavy rains was a much more dramatic and interesting setting. Before I explain the tournament and we begin with the pairing of the participants, I have an announcement for our esteemed audience. Bart, the winner of the 38th preliminary round, will unfortunately not be joining the tournament. Which means we will have a bye in the first round's drawing, she revealed and continued without losing any momentum. The tournament will be random single elimination, she started, and a simple tournament tree appeared on the big screens. It had 6 levels of rounds, however it lacked the usual progression path up to the final. Unlike a traditional tournament where the opponents a participant could face in the following round would be fixed, there will be a new drawing at the start of every new round, meaning the participant will never know who their enemy in the next round will be. Exciting, right? She explained the tree graphic to the audience. The tournament structure was acknowledged with mixed feelings, mostly by people who were into gambling. This structure made traditional betting harder as there was no clear path of possible progression to bet it. As if holding back the structure of the tournament up to the first day wasn't bad enough, choosing this structure one could think Minasmar was against gambling. On the contrary, there were many bookies instructed by Jane, that offered various different opportunities to bet on and specialized in the tournament. Myanmar wasn't against gambling, they were trying to monopolize it. As you can see, our numbers are a little unfitting, so there is a little specialty. There will also be a bye in the drawing for the second and third rounds, but on top of that 2 of the losers will get another chance to return in the 4th round, she revealed to the crowd. The rule of random drawing for every route already seemed whimsical, but the whimsy was about to continue. How will these lucky ones be chosen, you may ask? UMI leaned into the camera questioning. Of course, by popularity vote from the live audience. You, the viewers, will be able to vote on who you want to see return for the quarter-finals, she called out with a big smile. The audience was shocked for a moment. They would be given the power to decide on 2 placements in the quarter-finals. Was this proper? Was this fair? Probably not, but it was original and the crowd loved the power given to them, as they answered the moderator with overwhelming cheers. Well, then, let's proceed to see who will fight each other in the first round. A gaudy man with a draw pot entered the arena. His clothes and charisma outed Reiki as a talented bard and showman, which was why the fair was chosen to appear here. He was holding a very special kind of drawing pot, an item that could not be influenced by a player's luck attribute. It was a small gift from Bryce, the local master of the Adventurer Guild. When prompted to, each participant of the tournament stepped forward to draw a lot. One by one, the pairings appeared on the big screen around the arena. The pairings were met with cheers and poltern, but when the eponymous participant stepped up to the draw, his expression crumpled up in bitterness. He had drawn the bye. Like the dwarf, the audience cried out in disappointment. The bye meant that Poulter would only get to find during the second round. Hey, knee splitter, do you maybe want to trade with me? A voice asked from behind him. It was a tall, barbarian woman. Her body was riddled with bulging muscles. She wasn't just muscular, but was also well endowed and had a beautiful face, satisfying a very special kind of kink the audience and the people in chat had warmed up to during her battle in the preliminaries. The number of times people asked to be crushed between her thighs or drown in her would explode whenever she was on screen. Poulter was shocked, as he didn't expect the so-called muscle mommy to be able to speak so softly and gently. She even blushed a little when talking to the dwarf. Even going as far as to use one of the appropriate honorific pronouns for a dwarven warrior. Why would you want to trade with me? He asked a little perplexed, more in shock about her approach, than about her question. Was it even allowed to switch opponents? That guy is a creep. I do not wish to risk my chastity in this battle, she whispered, but the golem microphone picked it up. Many people looked at the pairings and nodded, while the chat kept raving as it had already been since her pairing was announced. The man she was supposed to fight was a buff cultivator. He had no fancy techniques or elegant sword moves as the other cultivators had shown so far, but he was incredibly tough. The people of the voracious cloud continent called people like him body cultivators. Martial artists that focused completely on their physical prowess. But that wasn't the problem. Using his unbelievable tankiness, the man had already caused an uproar during the preliminaries as he took his time with female opponents, even if it meant suffering a beating. The new cult surrounding the barbarian idol was spamming in the chat ever since the pairing was announced. Poulter looked at the cultivator in question, who only had a smirk to offer at the woman trying to evade him. The dwarf himself had also seen his preposterous act during the preliminaries. Using a fight to the death to harass the opponents of the opposite sex, it was clear this wasn't an exception for this guy, but his modus operandi. Is that allowed? Poulter asked Reiki, whether they were even allowed to exchange places. Reiki put his hand to his ears, as he listened to the instructions he was given directly from Myanmar's VIP booth. 2 participants exchanging opponents is not valid, he started. A big O of disappointment and some boos came from the audience. However, since this is a bye, it does not matter. If both of you agree, it can be done, the bard ended his sentence, causing the audience to heave a sigh of relief. What about my opinion on this? The buff martial artist came over and asked in a bad mood. It seemed that he didn't expect the rules to be bent so easily. Again, Reiki put his hand on his ear, to get instructions. I will relay the Tower Master's words. Nobody gives a fuck about your opinion. Now shut up, or there will be a second bye in the first round. Is what I was asked to tell you, the bard relayed the message word for word. Who do you think you are? Do you know who I am? The cultivator exclaimed offended. Yes, we know. Do you wish to continue like this and forfeit the tournament? The bard asked wittily, but his eyes were cold. There was nothing he wanted more than to get the chance to kick this guy out right now. However, the muscle brain had more wit than one would expect, and he begrudgingly reined in his rampant ego trip. Self-control was apparently a virtue among cultivators, but for some reason, very few of them actually held that virtue. Seeing the man back off was a wonder in and of itself. Good, then it is decided. Participant Polter Onyxheart exchanged his bye with the barbarian Simplicity and will fight the cultivator Dumting in the third fight of the third round. Ray I announced, and the pairing on the screen switched to reflect the change. Okay. With everything in place, do you want to finally kick this party off? UMI roused the audience. They were all stoked for the first fight, poltering away in the stands. All participants except the first pair left the arena. Left in the arena were two men. On the left stood a tall, muscular man, his only special feature being the bald head and third eye on his forehead. On the right stood a warrior covered in full leather armor, wielding a halberd. His face was hidden by the spectacle helmet and chain veil. You all know them. On the right, we have Tian Shen, who has shown terrifying martial prowess in the preliminaries. On the right is Byron, a rising star of the Boulder Guild, a local guild of Earth. Are you two ready? She waited for the two combatants to give their okay before continuing. Then let's start our first fight. Chapter 1083 Byron vs Tian Shen. The crowd cheered, but the poltern stayed in moderation. Tian Shen was a cultivator who had shown great basic power and technique, but it also meant that his fighting style was somewhat plain. Of course, seeing someone destroy armor, weapons, and magic with their bare fists had charm to some people, but it wasn't in the overall taste of the audience that looked forward to flashy skills and magic. Byron also wasn't really one that satisfied the audience's thirst for flashy carnage. Although he had won his preliminary round, similar to his opponent, it wasn't like he single-handedly killed all 100 of his opponents. As such, the first pairing did not gain any immediate love from the audience, past the enthusiasm to see a brutal fight. However, the moment the fight started, the two opponents vanished from the spots on opposite sides of the arena. With an ear-shattering crash, they clashed in the center. They had moved so fast that barely anyone in the audience was able to see them move. Fists, feet, and halberd clashed in a quick exchange of moves, spraying sparks everywhere. Flashing light kept shining like lightning in the thunderstorm. The whole scene being accentuated by the pouring rain, drenching the two combatants. Seeing their sudden speed and power, the audience realized that they had held back during the preliminaries. A series of sharp stabs from the halberd's pike drove the cultivator back. Although he managed to deflect or block the attacks with his palms, they were colored red as the rain mixed with the blood flowing from his wounds. The two finally split, taking some distance from one another for the first time since the fight started. Tian Shen's powerful fists, which had broken many weapons so far, were biting on granite, facing the halberd from Mars storage. The almost silent high-speed display of martial skill, despite lacking the flashiness of magic, managed to rouse the excitement of the audience, adding the roaring, cheering, and poltern of the audience, to the soundscape of pouring rain and clashing weapons. Tian Shen could be seen taking a deep breath, as he calmed himself. It seems the tournament is truly on a different level than the preliminaries. It would be disrespectful to hold back any longer, he spoke in a calm voice before his hands started glowing in a golden light. Dodonpa, he suddenly shouted, and a golden energy beam shot toward Byron. Aiming for the opponent's heart with incredible speed, the beam exploded in a bright light, leaving the audience unable to see how it affected Byron. However, Tian Shen didn't have the time to check either, as he had to evade the answer to the question in the next moment. A crescent of pale green light, aiming to lop his head off, came flying straight at him. It was only when the replay from the Golem recording ran, that people realized what happened. Byron had silently blocked the sneak attack with the shaft of his halberd, and used the resulting stance to swing it down in a forceful motion, shooting off the energy attack, aiming for Tian Shen's life. By the time the cultivator recovered from dodging, the warrior was already onto him. This time he had the initiative, and his halberd was coated in a green aura, similar to the skill he had just fired off. Yet, the fight stayed balanced, as Tian Shen had also started using a kind of aura to deflect the barrage of attacks. Despite coming to appreciate the raw fight in the beginning, the audience was delighted to see the battle become flashier with energy beams and aura skills being reflected in the puddles of water from the rain. Tian Shen felt pressured, and it wasn't only because his sneak attack was easily parried. For a while now, he felt a foreign energy wreaking havoc in the wounds on his hands. They didn't just not heal but seemed to grow gradually worse. If this went on, he would soon be unable to fight. Running out of time, he chose his only, albeit cowardly move, Taken, Tian Shen cried out and the whole arena was drowned in a flash of light. He rushed forward. His opponent had to be blinded. So far, there had been nobody who was able to resist the light of the solar flare his master taught him. Although this attack was a little cowardly, this was for their schools. If he was able to bring home a heaven-grade weapon, the Crane School would rise again, to even greater height. As expected, the native had broken his stance and seemed to be confused. Tian Shen, his straightened hand enveloped in aura to create a blade, charged at his opponent, intending to pierce his hand straight through his body and heart, killing him in a single move. The streaming rain couldn't cool his heated body, as he put all the energy into this attack. This was the end. He would advance in the tournament and bring home glory and the prize. His hand stabbed forward, sure of his victory. The feeling of his hand breaking through the armor and ripping to the flesh of his opponent. The boiling blood and the heat of life when his hand entered another living being, didn't happen. His hand pierced through Byron, he saw it with his own eyes, but it was like touching air. There was nothing. Then the world started tilting. The last thing he remembered was his head hitting the floor of the arena and his own, headless body slumping to the ground. Then everything became dark. Once Tian Shen's body crashed to the ground and vanished to be revived at the Adventurer Guild's revival point, the image of the confused Byron that had been stabbed vanished and the real Byron appeared from a haze, blood still dripping from his halberd. The audience was going crazy. It had started with an incredible display of skill, only to have a turnaround and end with an incredible trade of deceptions. One tried to blind his opponent, only to be slain by a hidden enemy. Byron, silent as he had been during the whole fight, stood in the middle of the arena, waiting for his victory to be announced. He didn't have to wait long for Umi to appear beside him, a bright smile on her face, shielding him from the rain, still pouring down from above. As you all saw, we have a winner. Byron of the Boulder Guild is the first participant to move on to the next round, she announced, lifting his arm in the air. The crowd that had been silent in bafflement at the sudden and abrupt end broke into cheers. Accompanied by the crowd's roars, Byron left the stage making way for the next fight. The match between him and Tian Shen had barely taken 20 minutes. That was exciting, wasn't it? We will have a small break to check the stage before our next pair enters the arena, she announced. The break also gave the audience some time to process what happened, watch replays, get some food and drinks, or use the toilets. Wow, I didn't expect your Byron to be that strong. What was that last move? Galwell asked Brock in surprise. Byron had not shown any special skills apart from his prowess and control and spearmanship during the preliminaries. Byron is our ace, I would have been surprised if he had been the one of the three that didn't advance, Brock bragged confidently. However, he didn't reveal what move Byron had used. After all, there was a chance that he would meet Tiny in the following rounds. There was no way he would reveal anything to Galwell at this point. Fine, keep your secrets, it's not like he will stand a chance against Tiny with such tricks, Galwell taunted a little. We will see about that if your Tiny even gets into the next round, Brock said smugly. Tiny's performance in the first round was similar to Poulter's, as he brutally struck down dozens of opponents with an oversized hammer, but he had already shown struggle against some of the stronger people in the preliminaries. On the other hand, his opponent was diametrically opposed to him. The Dark Mage of Mud had wreaked havoc in his preliminary bracket and killed all 99 of his opponents himself. As a creature immune to physical damage, he was the worst opponent for Tiny. I wouldn't be so sure about that, Galwell said mysteriously. Was he hinting that his protégé was still holding something back, despite already struggling in the preliminaries? Chapter 1084 Great and Thunderous. Welcome back from the break, Umi Calldrops greeted the audience once again, 10 minutes after the first fight. I hope all of you managed to take care of your business and get ready for the next fight. 2 new participants entered the stage. Although everyone was looking forward to the third fight between Caleb and the ruffian cultivator, this fight still managed to garner much attention. On the left side, floating slightly above ground, was a being of nightmares, a demon from uncountable fairy tales, a boogeyman that could make a grown man pee his pants, a Sanat Bog. Creatures with the faces of deep-sea creatures and a dark desire for the minds and memories of sentient beings. It wore a dark glossy attire, that accentuated its alien appearance. Despite being revived without injuries, the creature had left the nearly 100 opponents it slew a lasting trauma, they may never recover from. Facing the materialized nightmare, was a chosen from a different world, a man aching to a battle bard with the powers of Bragi, the Asgardian god of poetry. Both had shown incredible crowd control during the preliminaries, making this matchup very interesting. Would the chosen of God, using word magic, be able to defeat the childhood nightmare of most people in the audience and those watching at home? Even Umi looked a little uncomfortable, being this close to the creature, observing her with dark eyes full of cold intelligence. But as a professional, it didn't stop her from doing her role. On the left, we have Alhun, a proud Sanatbalg from the inchworm swamps of the sulfuric plains. On the right we have Briga, a bard from a world called Astef and the chosen of Bragi. She waited a moment for the cheers of the crowd to subside. Are both combatants ready? Good. Then, let the fight begin. She gave the signal after they both nodded and hurried back above the arena, outside of the shield, so she wouldn't be pulled into their fight. She was barely out of the barrier when the two clashed. Briga had unsheathed his blade, a saber with rows of small holes and a row of rings, that would generate sound in conjunction with his fighting techniques. However, the Sanatbalg had already raised its hand, and like the countless fighters during the preliminaries, Briga seemed to experience incredible pressure, forcing him to lower his stance. He barely managed to keep himself from kneeling down, like the many before him did. With a sudden acceleration, Alhun shot toward Briga, who had trouble standing straight. The audience already saw the repeat of the horrible scenes they had seen before. The Sanatbalg would latch onto his victim's head, crush its skull with the jaws hidden below the rubbery flesh and suck out all the emotions, memory and brain, leaving a dead husk on the ground. Fall. It was a dark voice, a deep voice, one that penetrated everything and even raised the hair on the skin of the onlooker who only heard it through the loudspeakers. It didn't seem to fit the bard, but it was Briga who pressed out the word through gritted teeth. The word magic was like an irrefutable command to the world, and the creature charging at him was smashed to the ground with incredible force. Its soft body, a mockery of a human shape, squelched and burst, as the momentum carried it forward across the arena floor, leaving bits and pieces of violet goo in a streak on the floor. Stunned, the injured Sanatbalg tried to stand up where it came to a halt. It was hissing and gargling, as if talking to itself, before turning to Briga, who was now standing straight again. The sudden command had stopped Alhun's control. Very well, I underestimated you, the Sanatbalg said in a cold, poised tone. Its voice was emotionless and controlled. It will not happen again, it said and started casting. A dark miasma rose from the arena floor, but it was accompanied by the light clangs, a harmonic whistling, that was generated from the bard's sword dance. I didn't get where I am today by letting myself get pushed around. No man or beast or Sanatbalg or boogeyman is going to drag me down. The pouring rain intensified around them, as Briga's haunting voice penetrated the arena. His voice was oozing with dark disdain. Thunder rolled in the clouds above, and the dark mists rising from the stage couldn't withstand the waves of music. Fumbling, the Sanatbalg found his spells failing in the heavy rain. His claws surrounded in a devilish aura, and he rushed at the bard to attack him, but as he danced his number the boogeyman was unable to touch Briga, who kept dancing and singing, building up momentum. The lightning will be flashing. The thunder, it will roar. You'll never know what hit ye. Wait till you see what I have in store. A savage kick to the stomach in the middle of the dance pushed Alhun away from him, as his choreography intensified. Only the whistling of the sword, the drumming of the rain, and the bard's voice could be heard in the stadium as if everyone was listening to a sacred ritual in silence. Great and loud, it's gonna be great and loud. When you fall, you'll really fall. And you're gonna fall big. And you're gonna fall loud. You're gonna fall big in. A blinding light filled the arena. The whole stadium shook with a thunder that penetrated the audience deep into their chest and marrow. A massive lighting had suddenly struck the center of the stage, in sync with the lyrics of the song. Blinded and deafened, the people could only stare as they slowly regained their senses of sight and hearing. There was nothing to hear, the world had fallen silent, but the arena was a sight to behold. Where Alhun the Sanatbalg had stood was only a blackened crater, tens of meters wide, and only soot was left from the terrifying foe. Briga on the other hand had come to a halt. His dance was over, and the song finished. He was sheathing his sword, sure of his victory. And then he turned around and faced Umi, who came down to congratulate him. Against everyone's expectations, there was no sudden turnaround like in the first battle. Everyone would have thought especially a dark creature like the Sanatbalg had a way to evade that strike, but the announcer's appearance confirmed that Alhun had actually appeared at the revival spot in the medical wing. We have a winner. Briga won with a crushing stage performance, kicking Alhun out of the tournament. A great applause for our winner. UMI exclaimed, breaking the audience from their stupor. The silence was gone, the rushing of rain and the roar of the crowd seemed even louder than ever before. The bard waved at the crowd with a charismatic smile but didn't say anything. Despite trying to hide it, the attentive observer could see the sign of fatigue on Briga. Slight shaking of his hand, weakness in his knees. The fight had not been as easy as it seemed, but he was victorious. Wasn't that a little fast? Finn asked, slightly disappointed. She had had some expectations of the boogeyman of the preliminaries, but the Sanatbolg was gone in an instant. The second fight was even shorter than the first, but there was nothing wrong with it as long as the fights were exciting. They had planned 4 days for the tournament. If things progressed faster than expected, they could simply elongate the scheduled break before the final. Constant excitement would only cause people to get bored if the level wasn't kept high. A break was just the right thing to allow the people to calm down and recuperate a little. No, this is good, Finn, Jane suddenly answered Finn, but she didn't find it good for the same reason as Seth. A lot of people bet on the brain sucker to win. We made quite a lot with this quick loss, she added happily and started laughing to herself. PSHT, the third fight is beginning, Monique admonished Jane. The Chosen of Athene had been looking forward to Poulter's fight. As a spear demon herself, she was looking forward to the Poleaxe demon's performance. Chapter 1085 Blessing of J. Aquas. The third fight was about to begin. Why did things have to progress so quickly? Minas Mar's erratic rules and last-minute announcements had not just complicated the work of independent betting shops, but also his own mission. As the only one of their team that made it to the tournament, the burden weighed heavy on him. He had to make it to the end. Sitting in his own private room, he was given as one of the tournament participants. He was mulling over his situation. Conflicted, he looked at the small vial in his hands. How much he had longed for this tiny thing back in the day. The power it promised, the life it would give, but now he was hesitating. He was scheduled to fight a cultivator in the 7th match. From what he saw of the preliminaries, he stood no chance. If he took the serum now, the transformation might be finished by the time he was supposed to fight, then he would stand a chance, but what if the next fight continued to grow shorter and shorter? Even if everything went well, what if Minas Mar found out about him over the course of the next few fights? Stuck in his worries, he didn't notice the shadow slithering into the room from below the door. Hehe, you can't beat Chun Long, you know it yourself, right? You are worried they will find out who you are when you transform, right? Your tiny worries are so easy to read, a smooth, silky voice whispered in his ears. Although he didn't notice it enter, he didn't panic. What do you want? He had already recognized that it was a demon talking to him. Since a demon dared to enter his private booth like this, his was probably not hostile, but sent by their allies. Although he understood that this shaky bond was necessary, it didn't mean he liked working with them. Right to business, good. You are not the only one who knows you probably won't be able to win against the cultivators, that's why my lord sent me here, to give you a chance, the demonic voice whispered. Don't make such a face, it's not like I'm here because I want to either, but we need more people in the next round for the plan to work out, it said, annoyed when the man grimaced. Yeah, it was all for their secondary plan. Fine, how does this work, he said, placing the vial back in his inventory. He would listen first, to see if the demon's suggestion had a lower risk. The shadow that came in from below the door stretched and separated from the surface it was cast on, becoming a dark, transparent snake. You just have to reach out your hand and repeat the following sentence. I accept the blessing. Then you will be given part of the powers of the great demon. Easy, right? The snake spoke enchantingly. The man nodded. Since demons were also participating, the blessing of a demon would draw less attention than sudden immortality. Fine. I accept the blessing, he said and stretched out his hand. Good boy, the snake laughed and bit him. When it bit his arm, a dark tattoo appeared, looking ugly and infected. He didn't utter a sound, but his face distorted when he felt the dark, burning power infect his body and mind. Ding! You have accepted the blessing of J. Aquas. All your physical attributes have risen by 50. Ding! You have new skills in your skill window. And now, I would be much obliged if you gave me that vial, the snake said haughtily. The man didn't want to, but his body moved on its own. He took the vial from his inventory and handed it to the snake. Don't worry, the power-up is real, just, don't tell anyone I took the vial, the snake said and left with a sinister laughter. He slumped on the bed when the control over his body finally faded. Just what had he done? Someone knocked on the door. Sir Onyx Heart, your match will start soon. Would you please get ready and enter the arena, a staff member informed him. All right, I'm ready, the dwarf answered. He had already worn and checked his armor thoroughly. He had just been doing the last touch UPS on his weapon and shield. Maintenance shouldn't be neglected, even with magical weapons. When he opened the door, he found a man in a suit waiting for him. He was one of the staff from Mina's march. The participants' rooms were protected by several layers of defenses, one of which was a labyrinthine structure of hallways and stairs that led to them. Although none of them would stop someone with a member's pass for the participants, the structure alone usually needed a guide. This was why an employee would lead the participants to the arena, and also to make sure nobody interfered on the way. The noise of the crowd greeted the dwarf as he stepped out into the stadium. Rain hit his helmet and shoulders, but found no gap to enter his armor. On the other side of the oval, he saw his opponent also stepping into the rain. Poulter had spent the morning watching the replay of the preliminaries. Despite his skewed personality, he had to admit that the giant of a man was going to be a tough opponent. Like Tian Shen, he used no obvious energy techniques in the preliminaries, however, his physical might itself was several steps above the cultivator Byron fought. Bare fists that punched through high-quality armor, bare muscles that stopped epic-rated blades. The analysis from the fight in the preliminaries made it quite clear why he didn't use weapons. The man's body was refined to the level of an epic or higher rated equipment. It seemed like he was confident not to need any external items. A notion that was foreign to the dwarf. No matter how strong one was, a force multiplier would always come in handy. Stepping on the stage, the quirky moderator appeared floating over their heads, however, Poulter didn't care much for her drivel. His eyes had met with Dum Ting. The other gave him a gaze full of cruelty, his looks making clear what he intended to do with the dwarf. Sparks were flying between the two, one angry to have his chance for groping the well-endowed barbarian babe taken from him, the other feeling offended for being perceived as easy prey. The round, attractive face of Umi Caldrop slowly lowered between the two and whispered in a way the audience was unable to listen, her voice cold and threatening. Listen here, you little shits, stop sharing romantic gazes and get ready. I will announce the start of the fight now, surprising both of them with her crass words. Why was she of all people suddenly pissed? And why was his hair standing on end like this? What Poulter did not know, because he concentrated on staring back at Dum Ting and ignored Umi's drivel, was that she had already tried asking the two pigheads 5 times for their confirmation that they were ready. Since our contestants are finally ready, let's start the fight, she called out to the audience in her usual, upbeat voice. However, she did emphasize the finally. Hurriedly, Poulter took his stance. It was time for the fight people had been looking forward to. With Dum Ting fighting barehanded and Poulter carrying a poleaxe, the onset of the fight resembled the first one between Tian Shen and Byron. While one tried to get close, the other used his superior reach to his advantage. As similar as it looked in the beginning, it became soon clear that the standard both participants were acting on was a lot higher than the first fight. Chapter 1086 Dum Ting. Dum Ting, will crush you, the cultivator roared, gaining many boos and disapproving glances from the audience. It seemed that nobody among the cultivators in the audience agreed with his self-proclaimed title. His roar was only met by Poulter's chuckle. Who would have thought that that wide chest of yours was only there to bellow empty phrases, the dwarf sneered. Grunting, Dum Ting showered the dwarf in quick jabs, that were all evaded despite his opponent wearing heavy armor. Suddenly, in between the quick combination of punches, his muscles suddenly visibly bulged as he wound up and mixed in a lightning-fast, brutal punch. The audience that had a hard time following the action suddenly heard an audible crunch, followed by Dum Ting quickly taking his distance from Poulter. Only high-level adventurers and cultivators were able to see what happened with their bare eyes, others had to watch the replay of the golem recording. A fist traveling with incredible speed had been met by a shield covered in a thin layer of silver aura. Deforming on impact with a crunch that could be heard in the whole stadium, it was safe to say that the first lost this encounter. At the same time, the poleaxe of the little combatant had aimed to lop off the cultivator's ankle, forcing him to quickly take flight. To the onlooker, there seemed to be a clear advantage to one side. Dum Ting leave 94. What a monster, Poulter thought internally, checking his opponent's status with appraisal. Although he could barely see his physical stats, it was enough to make the dwarf think like this. The cultivator didn't wear any items that increased his strength, but all of his physical attributes were above 400, despite keeping a, albeit ugly, human form. Especially his defense was comparable to his own, wearing the armor. The dwarf felt reminded of Azatane, the golem he had fought a few days earlier. If there was one difference, then that the cultivator was fighting without a weapon, making the fight easier on Poulter, having the range advantage. However, he had gotten cocky, when the cultivator proved to be quite predictable. He intended to feel out his opponent, but the sudden punch had caught him off guard, instinctively parried it with his shield and shield saint aura. The impact had him shudder and he quickly counter-attacked to gain some comfortable distance. He didn't like to admit it, but he had to get serious. Although he had studied the preliminaries, Dum Ting was above what he had expected. He had hoped to keep some of his skills up his sleeve for the following rounds, but this was not the time to take things slowly. This wasn't like his fight with Azatane, where the only stake was a lost bet. This was still the first round of the tournament, his pride didn't allow him to lose before he showed everything he got. Determined, he looked at his opponent, seeing his action with slight surprise. Although the hand should have been pulverized, the other was already balling and releasing his fist, as if it had just fallen asleep for a moment. Showing his hand already functioning again, was a clear sign that he possessed incredible healing capabilities in addition to his physical attributes. He cracked his knuckles before turning to Poulter. "That hurt a little. But don't think your shell will save you next time, little tortoise," he said with a sneer, and his aura rose. His body started to grow. Poulter clicked his tongue. Since the other seemed to go all out, he would miss this chance to get in a fighting condition. Loosening his shoulders, he began activating a slew of buff skills. Dwarven Spirit to raise his willpower and endurance, Mountain Strength to raise his strength, Shield Aura to raise his defense. On the other side, the almost 2-meter-tall man easily grew to double his height, becoming a terrifying sight to behold. Poulter, on the other hand, didn't grow in size. Instead, his shield slipped from his hand and he grasped the poleaxe in both hands. For a moment, the glint of mockery could be seen in Dum Ting's eyes and expression, thinking his opponent lost the will to fight. But it was quickly snuffed out when the shield started floating in a perimeter around the dwarf. It was not that his shield was an ego item, but it was one of the skills of a shield saint, Shield Will, which instilled part of the wielder's will into the shield. "A flying shield? What kind of bullshit is that?" he exclaimed, aggravated. "I will show you that all your toys are nothing in front of true skills," Dum Ting exclaimed, gaining some approval from the audience. To not rely on external means was a big part of the philosophy of many cultivators. Two seemed to be ready to clash again. After the moment it took them to power up, the two fighters rushed at each other again. Now facing a 4-meter-tall giant, the dwarf started infusing his aura into the poleaxe. Dark flames licked up from the weapon in his hand. Although the poleaxe was inspired by the axe of chains Seth had once lent him, this was the fundamental difference between the two. The flames, looking like cursed fire, were the blessing of O. O was the god of dwarfs and anything underground from Poulter's home world. Unlike cursed fire, this was a pure dark flame, without anything evil or twisted. Mixed into the blessing was Poulter's aura as the Poliarm demon, raising its damage and speed in addition to the blessing of his god. "Mountains Crusher!" Dum Ting exclaimed, his fist clad in red aura. The attack carried a terrifying pressure, literally, the power to crush mountains. In turn, Poulter enveloped himself with the dark flames. After all, he was Shield Saint, a class evolved from a paladin. Enveloping himself in the power of his guardian deity was the basics. And when the fists descended on him, bind! Poulter used his chance to activate the weapon's skill. Dum Ting's body was stopped in his tracks, and his terrifying strike halted. Against his will, he was frozen in a horse stance, his arms stretched out, still aiming for where the dwarf had stood. This wouldn't hold for long, Poulter knew this best. It took less than a second for the cultivator to regain control, but it was too late. Poulter jumped in the air, whirling the poleaxe in a whirlwind strike. He minced the Hulk's calves all the way up to his knees, where a final, devastating strike directly sank the axe blade into Dum Ting's knee, severing the bones and joint, only leaving it attached by a strip of skin. When Dum Ting regained control, he was already falling, bellowing in pain, as he crashed onto the arena floor, together with his devastating skill, creating several cracks and a small crater in the rare marble the arena was made of. Cutting him with the flames of O, the god of everything below, was Poulter's way to prevent his freakish healing. With his left knee severed and his lower legs engulfed in the dark flames, Dum Ting didn't seem like a threat, but Poulter had no intention of letting him off. But his opponent had also no intention of just dying when Poulter came for the final attack. Dum Ting, as if only waiting for the chance, kicked him away. He stood on his hands, using his burning lower leg to sort of roundhouse kick him across the arena. This fight was still far from over. "Don't think this is over, little man," Dum Ting hollered, rolling away before he got back on his feet at the edge of the arena. Chapter 1087 Saint's Charge. Standing on one leg at the edge of the arena, his gaze pierced Poulter, who was recovering from the kick to his guts. In an immense act of sheer will, Dum Ting ripped away the burning flesh without so much as a grunt, shocking the audience with the graphic display of self-control. In a quick motion, he swallowed a pill from the pouch on his belt. A fine haze surrounded him, as the wounds started closing at a speed that it looked like his flesh had gained its own spirit and started molding itself back into shape. Even his nearly severed leg also recovered at breakneck speed, dousing the last small flames that were still burning in the wound. There was some commotion from the audience, but Umi Caldrops shook her head, giving commentary. "You know the rules, there are no rules in the arena, the only restriction is that participants can't meddle with each other off stage," she reminded the people with a wink. The dwarf was back on his feet, but he didn't recover in time to stop Dum Ting's actions. Although the attack that catapulted him away seemed haphazard, it had dealt quite a bit of damage to his armor and left him momentarily stunned. But Dum Ting wasn't the only one who had some time and drugs on his hands. Since his opponent openly used doping, Poulter saw no reason not to do it himself. He downed a jug of Ironheart Stout, which improved his defense and all of his resistance and stamina. Seeing the dwarf imitate Dum Ting's actions, calmed whoever was still feeling a little peeved about the cultivator's shameless drug abuse. He was almost done, when he saw his opponent charge at him. It didn't seem like he would be given the courtesy to finish his drink in peace. Well, it didn't matter. With a practiced swing, lacking any superfluous motion, the jug took flight, aiming for Dum Ting's face with utmost precision. The ultimate insult among dwarfs, throwing a not-empty jug into the other's face. Surprised, the Muscle Mountain dodged the not-so-hidden projectile, only to find the peak of the poleaxe aiming for his face. Poulter left his defense to the shield, floating around him, while he concentrated on the offense. Mixing feints with actual attacks, he drove the giant back again. It wasn't just his proficiency, but also the vital points he was aiming for. It was safe to say that increasing his size was not to Dum Ting's advantage, as he brought his family jewels to the perfect height for the poleaxe to aim for from time to time. After several minutes of back and forth evading the cowardly attacks, the cultivators seemed to have enough. With several backflips he increased the distance between them, quick enough that Poulter couldn't rush after him, not even with his charge skill. Dum Ting made several hand seals before playing his palms together and releasing a deep breath. Then he started talking, his voice becoming louder and louder, growing more hysterical. "You know, little man, if this was a real fight, I would have fled, as you are not worth risking my life. But did you know, given the nature of this tournament, there is no reason to hold back on forbidden techniques," he ended in crazed laughter as his skin started turning a crimson red, and black markings surfaced all across his body. Dropping "This is not even my final form," the battle entered the second stage. There were murmurs in the crowd, it seemed like the cultivators among them knew what was going on. Sitting in Minasmar's private booth, Master Mountain also scowled at the sight. He had returned the other day, just in time to see the tournament. Xiang Peng and his disciples had also arrived with him, but they were given their own booth. What is going on?" Seth asked curiously. Dum Ting had just started transforming in the arena and started looking like a devil. "You heard what he said, it's a forbidden technique. It's what we call techniques that can rapidly raise the user's power, but they usually come at a great cost. Usually, the user would be burning away their lives for a temporary boost, but this is a form of bedevilment," Yu said, disgusted. "What does that mean?" the blacksmith asked, surprised by the new term the cultivator had used. In the arena, the fight jumped back into action, as Poulter was not nice enough to wait for Dum Ting to finish his transformation. However, it was clear that the Shield Saint had lost the initiative. He was more and more often forced to parry or block attacks, relying heavily on his shield. "I don't know what technique this man is using, but the visible signs of bedevilment show that he probably sacrificed a huge number of lives to gain power," he explained. "Since they can revive, it seems he is even burning his life force on top of everything. His power already doubled compared to before and is still rising. I'm afraid your friend won't be able to keep this up for much longer." In the arena, a circle of 5 shields of light appeared around Poulter, when a barrage of fight rained down on him. The brilliant skill that illuminated the wet arena didn't stay for long, as the magical shields quickly broke under the force of the fists and kicks of the cultivator. A power gained by sacrifices, that really sounded like a demonic pact for once. It's not what you think. It has nothing to do with the demons you know. This is about rituals to absorb the flesh, blood, and energy of the pure and innocent, you corrected Seth's line of thought. Point 4. The innocent and pure. Finn asked concerned. This definition left only one group of people in her mind. Karina's expression had also hardened. Seeing her serious face, Yu hesitated for a moment to continue. But he did it anyway. It is as you think. These rituals are known to predominantly sacrifice children and youths for the purity of their bodies and qi. Having amassed so much power, Dum Ting must have sacrificed hundreds or even thousands, Master Mountain said with a heavy voice. Dum Ting leave 150, boss. His opponent had suddenly grown to become a monster, gaining over 50 levels, and was even recognized as a boss mob by the system. The tremendous rise in power became apparent in their fight. Poulter was struggling a lot, while his opponent kept growing stronger as time went on. Despite his attacks becoming easier to predict, it didn't help a lot, since Poulter was not quick enough to really use his knowledge. The strike kept coming faster and faster, although he tried utilizing the black flames, Dum Ting simply resisted, as his fists kept crashing against the dwarf's shields and armor. Poulter could feel it the moment before it happened. His bulwark, the relic shield that had kept all attacks away from him, gave in. It was an inaudible crack, as all the accumulated damage connected and an unstoppable fist aimed for his life. He saw it as if it was in slow motion. Crashing through his shield, aura, and barrier, it formed into a claw and ripped away the armor and flesh on the left of his rib cage. He could feel his flesh and muscle tear with excruciating clarity. But he didn't lose his cool, he wasn't dying yet. Raising his broken shield, he activated Saint's Charge for a last devastating strike. In a ray of bright light, the dwarf shot at the monstrosity to take its life. The poleaxe stretched forward, aiming for Dum Ting's heart. Poulter attempted a last valiant charge, yet a monstrous hand slapped away the polearm with a force that ripped it from Poulter's grip. The poleaxe clattered across the arena, quickly followed by its owner, who received a bone-crunching kick. His right arm he used to block the kick was broken, but he landed close to the poleaxe. He started crawling toward it when he felt a terrible pain in his lower leg. Looking back, the Red Hulk stomped his leg. It was broken with his foot turned in an unnatural angle. Still, Poulter just grunted. You are playing tough, huh? Don't worry, this is far from over. I will use my remaining time to give you a hero's death, Dum Ting whispered with wicked glee. The dwarf was a realist and he realized he was fighting a vastly superior sadist. He wanted to give up, not giving the cultivator a chance to further humiliate him, but a vicious bitch slap broke his jaw. The next minutes were filled with agonizing pain until his sight finally went dark. The next thing he knew was that he woke up at the respawn point. He had lost terribly. He was actually eliminated in the first round. Chapter 1088 Garmin del Prado. The audience was shocked, their poltern stuck in their throats. Their great champion had not been simply snuffed out the moment after his opponent entered his second phase, no, they were forced to watch him get tortured by the beast his opponent had become. However, the moment the poltern stopped, an even greater turmoil erupted as the players fell silent. Cultivators who knew how Dum Ting won were appalled, many outright screaming their protest. Protest in the shape of curses and death threats. Had they been offended by his lustful nature before, they now outright asked for someone to take his life. It didn't take long for the people who wondered why the cultivators were snapping to ask for the reason, and the horrible truth quickly spread among the dense audience ranks until the whole stadium chanted for Dum Ting's death. Poulter's loss and how he lost was one thing, but they were the smallest reason for the crowd's reaction. The beast in question on the other hand was losing his mind. Acting like an aimless monster, crashing his fist into the arena floor, roaring mindlessly, he seemed out of control. The power he had accumulated had not been kind to him. Now, I understand what he said before. I don't want to imagine how he accumulated so much energy, but it seems that he can't control it once he unleashed it, Yu commented with a frown, seeing Dum Tinga acting at the center of the stadium. The berserk chi is melting his body from the inside out, he is currently dying with excruciating pain. Good. Let him. Finn said coldly, however, it didn't sound like this gruesome fate was not enough to appease her. It definitely wasn't enough to appease Karina, who was silently staring at the arena, her usually kind eyes were filled with murderous intent. I'm just saying this so nobody does anything stupid. Don't touch him while he is a participant in the tournament, he said to himself, as much as to the others. Seth gave the room a serious look, especially Karina, who seemed ready to jump into the arena right now. He's free game once he is out, he added. The blacksmith wasn't happy at all. Dumting's alleged deeds to gain power were appalling, but what had his innards boiling, was that he was forced to watch Poulter suffer, as the monster ripped him apart on the stage. The dwarf was one of the few outside of Mina's Mar, Seth considered a friend and cared for. What if he wins? Mina asked. She had a bad taste in her mouth just thinking about this creature winning the tournament and having Seth make a legendary weapon for him. Seth's nail was silently scratching on the armrest of his chair. Then he will get his legendary equipment. Of course, whether it will be a blessing or a curse to him, is up to me, he answered coldly. His tone made it quite clear, that it was not going to be the former, if the cultivator won. Boss, what do we do about this? UMI call drops finally asked over the comlink. It had been 2 minutes since Poulter's loss. Dumting was calming down, bleeding from all orifices. He was slowly falling silent. It was clear that he finally died. Declare him the winner and end him. We have more fight for the day, the Tower Master answered her, prompting her to give a small, but shocked nod. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, we have a winner. Dumting defeated Poulter Onyxheart and moves on to the second round, she said, slightly apologetic, facing the boos of the crowd. Nobody agreed with the outcome, but nobody could change it either. The fact that she continued on to crush the slowly dying Dumting's skull under her high heels to force him to respawn only appeased the crowd slightly. At least nobody blamed her for the outcome of the fight. In consideration of the current mood, management has decided to move the break and concert forward in the schedule. I'm sure we can all use some time to calm down and recollect our thoughts. We understand you are upset, but it would be a shame to let this overshadow the following events. The moderator announced the change in plans. It was as she said, there were still 12 more fights to come on the first day, and it would have been a shame to let this fight ruin the mood for the rest of the first day. This was why Seth and the others decided to move forward with the break and the musical performance. The performer was the Traveling Sound, the famous master bard Garmin del Prado, who had acted as a judge during the musical round. Seeing the current mood, they really needed his skill at the moment if they wanted to save the first day, if not the whole tournament. Where are you going? Mina asked when Seth stood up from his chair shortly after the change in schedule was announced. The break had just begun. Although the bard would have liked to see the performance of the master bard, there was something more important. To look for Poulter. I want to talk to him, he simply said before leaving. The dwarf had suffered a terrible loss. Worse than just being overpowered. Since business was dealt with and he calmed down a little himself, the blacksmith worried about the dwarf. The hallways of the stadium were filled with people, taking care of their business in the break before the music event. This couldn't bother Seth, he simply used the maintenance corridors to evade the crowd and appeared at the medical wing unbeknownst to anyone. They called it the medical wing and there was everything one needed to take care of the wounded, like healers and potions, but most importantly it was also the location of the respawn point. Seth hoped to find the dwarf still here. He was right. Right in his assumption and right in worrying. Poulter, wearing a casual dwarven chainmail, sat on one of the beds, but what Seth had worried about had also happened. Dumting, who had been ended by UMI, had obviously appeared here and the two combatants met here. The massive man was hunching over Poulter, who had looked back at his torturer with an uncharacteristically frightened face. Seth had never experienced such torture himself, but he had heard what it could do to people, to die like that. It seemed like his worry for Poulter was not unfounded, but that he met his torturer and killer right afterward made things even worse. Seth even blamed himself a little, that he had not thought of this before he gave the order to kill the beast. At the time, he was simply as upset as everyone else and wanted to get on with the tournament. Little man, how did you like that? Do you fear me now? Ho ho, that look in your eyes tells me you do, and you are right in doing so. Once this tournament is over, I will find you and... Dumting stopped talking when a heavy gauntlet suddenly rested on his shoulder. During the split second it stayed there, the cultivator felt a terrifying and dark energy enter his body. It was evil, and corrupted, but far colder and vicious than the power he gained from the sacrifices. Most of all, it was strong and fast, invading his body against his will before he could react and sapping away strength. He felt weak and sick, and vertigo rattled his brain while his field of vision distorted. His joints started aching and his stomach churning. Shocked, he turned to the man who laid his hand on his shoulder, trying to jump away from his touch, but a sudden blinding light blinded him for a moment. When his shaky vision returned, he was no longer in the weird clean room, where he was revived. He stood on a barren field, as far as his eyes could see. Above the dry plain of dirt was a black sky. An insurmountable feeling of dread filled his mind when a hand broke through the grey ash covering the dry ground. Dark hollow souls of children and women rose, grasping for his legs, his body, his being. The darkest fear that had plagued him in the dreams he was unable to remember until now, had come true. The souls of his victims had come for retribution, they were here to drag him into the dark emptiness outside the circle of reincarnation, where he had banished them with his deeds. He couldn't run, he couldn't hide. All his power was gone and he could only uselessly struggle as he drowned in their bodies and was pulled down into the darkness. What in the world did you do to him? Poulter asked befuddled, seeing the giant villain frozen in place. His expression was struck with terror, while his eyes were quickly jumping all over the place as if he was dreaming a horrible dream with his eyes wide open. Poulter waved his hand in front of the man's face, but there was no reaction at all. Seth glanced at Antares, his shield he used to cast harrowing light, right after using Liseth to give him a little taste of the plague curse. He didn't expect the light to be this effective on a cruel monster like this. Maybe he should use this more often? Don't worry about it. Let's leave here. Chapter 1089. The guy cheated. How do you feel, Poulter? Seth asked after they found an empty staff room. The blacksmith pulled out a few bottles of booze from his inventory and opened one for the depressed dwarf. How am I supposed to feel? Like shit. Not only did he break my shield and armor, I was trampled on and simply. Fuck man, I lost in the very first round, the dwarf complained frustrated. Seth nodded understandingly. Poulter had looked forward to shining in the tournament, but he met a truly terrible opponent right in the beginning. If it helps you, you shouldn't blame your gear, skills, or even yourself. You didn't lose because you were lacking, Seth told him seriously. Then why did I lose? Poulter asked, throwing his hands in the air. When it wasn't about him lacking experience or accumulation, or his gear, or his skills, then why did he lose? The guy cheated, Seth stated dryly. Not right here, not during the battle, but and then the blacksmith started explaining to the dwarf, what Master Mountains had told them before. Meanwhile, the measures to prevent the tournament from being ruined were underway and the Master Bard entered the stage to soothe the audience. Long story short, it worked. The Master Bard's performance even left a deep impression on the demons listening. His heartfelt songs in addition to his beautiful musical performance really soothed the upset crowd, helping everyone to slow down and relax. They didn't forget their rage toward Dumting, but they also realized that they would lose the chance to enjoy the event if they kept holding on to the grudge. With the crowd appeased, they could finally start with the rest of the fight for the day. The fourth fight showcased Leica, the Amazon against Alsmost, a sorcerer from Krina. The outcome was expected. Although the magician delivered a surprisingly tough fight, he couldn't beat the Amazon, despite her being heavily nerfed. The fifth fight presented a similar matchup. There was Tiny, the second in command of Gamma Resistance. The name was misleading, as he was the same kind of mountain as Galwell, maybe a little leaner, and he wielded a massive, fantasy-style hammer with a handle like a polearm. His opponent was another spellcaster from the Pathworks. If there was ever a personification of the phrase going full goblin mode, it was this scraggly old man. Wearing an old brown robe, that was too short for him in every aspect, he looked more like a goblin than goblins themselves. This man called himself the Dark Mage of Mug. While Tiny had shown during the preliminaries with his great skills as a warrior, attracting some fans, the Mage of Mug had stayed under the radar despite winning his preliminaries round. Despite not seeing much of the mage, everyone thought this matchup already had a clear winner. Until the Dark Mage of Mug was given their new moniker by the chat, the Mud Wizard. The moment UMI announced the fight, the whole arena turned into a swampy field of mud. Clinging to clothes and gear, it instantly made it hard for Tiny in his armor, and with his heavy weapon to move. While the warrior's movements were hampered, the Mud Wizard jumped around like a monkey, unhindered by the mud, which couldn't cling to his short, worn-out robe. Laughing, cackling, and mocking, he drew circles around Tiny, and kept flinging balls of mud at him, that stuck to the warrior's body, and weighed him further down. The Vice Master of Gamma Resistance went so far as to reveal his status as the Chosen of Magni, using overwhelming strength to rid himself of the mug, momentarily. No matter how strong he was, or the skills he used, he was unable to catch the elusive mud puppy. Meanwhile, the mud wizard did little apart from evading and building up mud on his opponent. However, this was enough. In the end, Tiny drowned under mountains of mud, mug, and swampy water, when his mana finally ran out. It was a surprising turnaround from the expected narrative, but it was also more light-hearted for the audience, as the old man kept slinging slurs and taunts at Tiny, together with his balls of mud, some of which hit the young man harder than the magic. Seth was even convinced that he probably had a bardic secondary class. It was the longest fight so far, as it took almost an hour for the mud wizard to wear down Tiny, yet nobody complained, as it all was one great performance by the spellcaster. Together with the previous musical performance and the admirable fourth fight, the mood of the day had mostly turned for the better. Riding the momentum, the next fight was all clean, exciting duels. The sixth fight brought a popular figure back into the spotlight. Alfalfa Bignoggin held a rare mix of classes. He was a type of summoner and a swordsman. He had previously shown a host of summoned creatures like a beautiful elven-looking elemental creature and an over 5-meter-tall barbarian humanoid. None of these creatures were below level 90, which essentially made him a one-man team during the preliminaries. On top of that, he augmented the common weakness of a summoner by becoming a tough swordsman himself. Using these summons and swordsmanship, he was able to shine in the preliminaries. He was also a rising star in the Krana Empire with growing popularity. Facing him was a cultivator who started off as a stranger to the audience, but rose in fame thanks to his performance in the preliminaries. Pearl Wowell was a cultivator with pale, immaculate skin and an androgynous face, that had both genders in the audience swoon for him. The skills he displayed had also left a deep impression on the people, especially Erdhans who knew this kind of power only from fiction. The man displayed a wide area of assassination skills. Most prominent were his invisible strings and flying weapons that dismembered his opponents before they themselves even realized it. Despite his fair and slender figure, he had shown brutal strength and cold judgment. And the winner is Pearl Wowell. UMI announced when the fight finished in a mere 5 minutes. As much as Bignoggin had tried to augment the weakness of a summoner, he was in a bad match-up against a professional assassin. Pearl Wowell had seemingly vanished the moment the battle began. Neither the summoned creatures nor the summoner were able to detect him until the moment all of them started from crisscross patterns all around their body and disintegrated into chunks of meat on the arena floor. The assassin only showed his figure to the fear-stricken Alfalfa, when the swordsmanship was already falling apart. The cultivator accepted his win with a silent note and minimal bow toward UMI before leaving the stage under the cheers of the audience. His cold and controlled demeanor, together with his fair face, had the crowd enraptured, making him a fan favorite. In the meantime, Seth had returned to the booth. After Seth shared with him the reason for the sudden power-up of his opponent, Poulter had asked the blacksmith for some time alone, to think. "Do you think Pearl Wowell would be able to skill Dumb Ting?" Mina asked you and Seth shortly after the fight ended, looking up from her screen. "Why do you suddenly ask?" Mike asked, surprised at the sudden question. There have been heated debates in the chat ever since Poulter lost. "Everyone is discussing who of the remaining participants should take Dumb Ting apart in the next round," she said and held up the tablet-like screen. Seth looked at the chat. After the last match, there were obviously a lot of people saying Pearl Wowell would do the same to Dumb Ting, others said that it would be more fitting for Leica to pummel the perverted monster to dust. Some were calling out people who had yet to make it to round 2. However, the strongest faction was advocating for a match between Dumb Ting and the Mud Wizard. They wanted to see the evil cultivator suffer helplessly, as Tiny had in his fight against the sharp-tongued mudslinger. If Dumb Ting relies on that power against Pearl Wood, he would probably lose," Yu said slowly. "He lacks control and self-awareness in that form. All that improves are his physical powers, so if the assassin disappears and strikes him from the shadows, there would be little he can do," Master Mountain concluded. Although Yu was their resident expert for cultivators, something was bothering Seth about this assumption, though he didn't quite know why he doubted it. Would it really be that easy to assassinate Dumb Ting? It was hard to accept that someone was supposed to have such an easy time, where Poulter could barely do anything. Well, we will see, if they get to meet. Chapter 1090 Adam Clark. The 7th fight was something special to watch. Not because of the cultivator Chun Long. Although he was much liked by the audience because he mixed sword moves with flashy magical techniques, his opponent was the unique one. Adam Clark was an adventurer from Y-City versed in gun kata skills that were developed in Y-City after the apocalypse. The weapons he used were some of the few surviving masterpieces of the gunsmiths of Ypsilon. All in all, it was a mix of hand-to-hand combat and the ability to summon various types of firearms from the inventory. The magic firearms developed in Y City left an impression even on the well-versed people from the Krna Empire. Although magical firearms were no new idea, as they were something every Hextech engineer would work on at some point, the products produced coming from an age of technology that adapted to magic were something else. Especially the explosives. His preliminaries played out like watching an action movie, where a single person with a host of guns and grenades mowed down a field of opponents. However, it was questionable whether he would be able to stand against the cultivators who did something quite similar, but in a much shorter time. Although many hoped for the marksman to continue on, so they could see him display more of his skills, it seemed questionable whether he would be able to defeat Chun Long, who outranked him in everything, judging on his skills in the preliminaries. "That's him, right?" Seth asked Lena, when both contestants stepped into the arena, under UMI's moderation. Adam Clark was not just any adventurer from Y City. He was quite well known during the time of the scene's reign and belonged to the higher caste of their societal system. "Yes, although we couldn't prove it so far, we suspect he is a candidate from the scene," the princess confirmed. Of course, they were not talking about the actual scene. They were the remnants that had not been in Epsilon at the time, which meant they evaded the district-wide eradication of their organization. Minasmar knew that they were still somewhere, hiding in the cracks and dark holes, waiting for a chance to take revenge. The problem was that not all of them were recipients of the immortal serum. Which meant they didn't have too hard of a time to enter as refugees. With Lena's help, they tried to keep an eye on everyone that could be a part or a collaborator of these remnants. As Princess of Krna, Lena was educated and had more experience with this kind of stuff, which was why they left it to her. The marksman was one of the suspects, but so far they couldn't find any definite clues. He had shown no reaction to the soul-whisking barrier when entering the city. He had also received no wounds during the preliminaries that could have betrayed the fact that he took the serum after entering. He also had not met anyone suspicious since entering Little Gamma. Still, they kept their eyes on him. Against their initial suspicions, a different surprise waited for them and the audience, when the fight began. Adam Clark had experienced an incredible power-up compared to the preliminaries. He was significantly faster and stronger as if all his attributes had received a massive boost. To the point that he was able to keep up with the vastly superior cultivator. The fight was a firework of magical techniques, explosions, and raw melee combat. Clark expertly wielded pistols, rifles, and fists, matching Chun Long's sword hit for hit and matching his bizarre magic shot for shot. But in a battle of attrition, Chun Long still had the upper hand. Although their attributes seemed to be equal, their stamina wasn't. Seeing Clark's power, Seth and Lena had initially thought that he had finally made a mistake and taken the serum, but it became clear what happened as the fight went on. Pressured by his own fatigue, Adam started to release a demonic aura. Now this wasn't the evil energy cultivators would talk about, but literally the aura of a demon. Clark had made a pact with the devil to improve his powers, and now he started incorporating curses and dark magic into his original skills to make up for his lack of stamina. His appearance also started changing, as half his face turned a pale grey and a dark blue horn started growing from the right of his forehead. Who knew what price he paid for this power, but it seemed to work and wasn't against the rules. After all, why would a deal with the devil be worse than being sponsored by a sky daddy? "I see, you have done well to have come this far. With an opponent like you, I feel no regrets going all out," Chun Long suddenly stated, and the cultivator's whole body started turning a light green shade of jade green. Chun Long stopped blocking Clark's shots and attacks altogether. The magic bullets and cursed shots could not even put a nick on the man's jade skin anymore. Before Adam and the audience even realized what had happened, Chun Long had already charged past his opponent. The marksman from Y City, the likely spy from the scene, parted into 4 pieces amidst a fountain of blood. Not even the deal with a demon had been able to secure his victor against the jade-skinned Chun Long. Up in the VIP booth of Minasmar, everyone looked at Master Mountain. The sudden spike in speed and defense that definitely pushed the cultivator past the Leave 100 cap they had set for the tournament, made them suspicious. Could Chun Long be similar to Dum Ting? But Yu shook his head. This is a secret technique of the Jade Well sect. As an inner sect disciple, it's no surprise for Chun Long to know it. It is only a temporary improvement and can't be compared to forbidden techniques like Dum Ting used, he explained calmly, guessing what was on their minds. As Adam Clark's body vanished from the arena, to revive at the respawn point, UMI went ahead and declared Chun Long the winner of the duel. Unlike the Clam Pearl would, Chunlong visibly enjoyed the attention and cheers of the crowd. Well, I guess that takes care of one potential spy, Seth mumbled. The next fight was one Seth had been personally interested in. Not because it was a fight between two women, but because one of them was the saintess of Gatries, the goddess of dark mercy. The leader of the same church, that had kidnapped children in Delta in an attempt to foster holy warriors, or summon an avatar of their goddess, or whatever it was they actually intended to do. Despite his ravenous Sog getting a power-up from foiling their plans, Seth still held a grudge, so he actually cheered for their opponent, a lady called Daolun. She was the first female cultivator in the first round and had the moniker Shadow under the rose bushes. From what Seth heard, this moniker had a layered meaning. On one hand, roses were beautiful but had thorns. Anyone in the stadium would attest that Daolun was a breathtaking beauty. You had to explain the second part to him. Calling her the shadow under the rose bushes was not as flattering as it sounded, as it called her a snake, waiting for her innocent victims to admire the roses, before striking them with her poisonous bite. The reason why they called her a poisonous snake with a beautiful face didn't need any explanation, as Daolun was the first truly terrifying poison cultivator Seth had witnessed. She was different from the wimp that was taken down by the lizardman in the preliminaries. She won the preliminaries by covering the whole arena in a poison mist, that melted her opponents within minutes. All the while laughing like a true demon. It was a battle between a maniac and a religious fanatic. Seth was used to hanging around people with one or two loose screws, so he still chose to cheer for the poisonous lady to win.